Last week, I received a call from a client. My client wanted to reopen his business. He called a few employees to return to work. They refused. He called me and asked me the question, can they do this? And I said, well, it really depends. But the main issue that we had to focus in on was the issue around occupational health and safety. And this is really crucial for us at this point in time as we reopen the economy, because back to the new normal. What is it going to look like insofar as we have not found a vaccine for COVID-19, which means basically the disease is going to remain with us for some time yet to come. And as a result of that, everyone will have their own perspective as to whether their workplace is safe. And it will really be a test for all employers, all owners, to ensure that they have done everything in their power to address the issue of health and safety as it relates to COVID-19. So, the reasons why they'll even ask, because they can. They right now have the issue of support from the government in terms of CERB. In other words, they don't have to be coming into the workplace at all because they've got government assistance. In many cases, that's superior to what they would have earned otherwise because they're working on shorter hours or in industries that did not command a high wage rate. And of course, they've got the magic right of refusal that is available under the Occupational Health and Safety Act that they can reference. And the perspective that I would like to suggest to you is that if you deal with this incorrectly, this will come back and haunt you in spades later on. We've talked about it earlier in a previous presentation, the three rights, the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse. I'm going to drill down into each one of these to give you a better appreciation of what your obligations are. So let's take a look at the right to refuse. Now, this is a quote from the Ontario legislation. A worker may refuse to work or do particular work where he or she has reason to believe that the physical condition of the workplace or the part thereof in which he or she works or is to work is likely to endanger himself or herself. Now, the workplaces are going to be quite different from an office setting into a hotel, into a restaurant, into a manufacturing plant. And on top of that, people are going to have their own perspectives as to what they consider to be unsafe or safe as it relates to COVID-19. The work refusal process is cumbersome, it's detailed. I don't believe it was ever intended to find its way into this type of an application, but here we are. And these are the steps that have to be considered. So first of all, a worker has to tell the boss that he or she feels it's unsafe. In turn, the employer supervisor must investigate the matter, preferably with a worker representative. The complaining worker has to be considered to be in a safe place, but has to make themselves available to participate in the investigation. If as a result of the investigation, the employee continues to refuse to work, then a government-appointed investigator is to be introduced. As a neutral, that investigator is required to consult with both the employer and the worker, and from that will render a written decision. No worker can be forced to do the work, but another worker can do the work provided they understand that there was in fact a work refusal. And throughout this entire process, nobody should suffer loss of earnings. So you can appreciate that the moment that you have somebody declaring, I refuse to do this work because I consider it unsafe because of COVID-19, this is the machination that's going to be created for you. So let's go to the right to know. So the workers have the right to know about any potential hazards that they might be exposed to. Now, the employer can do many things in order to familiarize the workers with what exactly is safe and unsafe in the workplace and what they in fact are doing about it. So number one, obviously information about hazards. Number two, providing training to do the work in a healthy and safe fashion. And then number three, to provide competent supervision to oversee the people as it relates to health and safety. And it's very important that we take a look at the word competent. This is competent as it relates to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's very specific and says you are required by law to have competent supervision. That is, everybody who is a manager, supervisor, owner should be familiar with the ingredients of the Occupational Health and Safety Act as it relates to their workplace. The right to participate is also another particular important point. And this can be done in terms of the workers actually appointing somebody to represent them. It's either going to be done through worker health and safety representatives or in large organizations, joint health and safety committees. So here's a breakdown in terms of how it might look. If you have 1 to 5 employees, you're not required to have either a joint health and safety committee or a health and safety representative. If you have 6 to 19 employees, and by this we're talking about regularly employed employees, you are required to have a safety representative, one from the management side and one from the worker side. 20 to 49 workers, you should have a joint health and safety committee with a representative from management and a representative from the workers. And if you have more than 50 employees, you're required to have 4 members, 2 and 2. Do the committee members need special training? So again, this is another ingredient to what you have to be contemplating as you try to fulfill your obligations under the Health and Safety Act, again, to prevent somebody from arguing that they're not coming to work here because they consider it to be unsafe. So you are in fact required for 20 or more employees to have 2 members of the committee, one from management, one from the workers, actually become certified. The certification process is relatively basic. First of all, as it relates to health and safety in a general sense, and then very specifically in terms of your own workplace. And they use what is called RACE methodology: recognize, assess, control, and evaluate. And in this case, we're talking about how does this apply as it relates to COVID-19? What should we be doing in order to make sure that the workplace is safe? To give you an idea of how important this legislation is and how it can impact on your business, look at this. An individual, if found guilty, can be fined up to $100,000 and imprisoned for up to 12 months. A corporation, if found guilty, can be charged $1.5 million per charge. We decided that we would try to provide you with at least some recommendations as you go forward. Now is actually a very good time where perhaps you have a little bit more time at your disposal. I know that you're probably preparing for re-entry into the economy and how are you going to be responding in a new marketplace. But I would certainly suggest that you might want to consider doing this and familiarizing yourself with this piece of legislation. So number one, understand what the act is about and the obligations for all the parties. And by that, I mean the owner, the employer, the supervisor, the worker, and the health and safety representatives. Number two, take whatever steps you have to take as it relates to the act, including obtaining worker representation. I have found that in many instances, workers are not interested in participating, and therefore it becomes a very, how can I put it, shallow type of approach to occupational health and safety. Number three, take a look at the criteria that you're going to be using in your workplace as it relates to COVID-19. What are the rules as it relates to sanitizing, enhanced cleaning, social or physical distancing? Importantly, the issue around personal protective equipment or PPEs, and where you are prescribing them, they must be enforced. In other words, you must expect that people actually use it where it's required. You should probably anticipate that there will be some work refusals, and familiarize yourself with what are you going to do when that happens. Because if everybody's refusing to do the work, I guess you have to ask yourself the question, how do I get the work done? Any employee bringing any kind of a action against the employer under the Occupational Health and Safety Act is free from reprisal. You cannot discipline a person for having done this. And on top of that, an employee should suffer no loss of earnings as they're going through this. Every province has its own approach to occupational health and safety. I recommend that you take a look at the legislation as it relates to your province. Just again, there are about 90% of workers in Canada are represented under provincial legislation and only about 10% under federal legislation. But each one has its own variation as it relates to the three rights of the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse. We believe that if you familiarize yourself with your obligations, you're going to be much better equipped, because without a doubt, the Occupational Health and Safety Act is going to be used probably as a weapon against you as you start contemplating the reopening of your business, hopefully to do it in a profitable fashion going forward. And if you have any other questions, please contact us at the number that and the names that we have given you.